Knock Farm is a 1,100 acre property between Murray and Aberdeenshire. It's a mixed farm. We rise from 400 feet above sea level to 1,400 feet above sea level. Of the 1,100 acres that we farm, about 300 of it is down to forestry and conservation areas, and the balance is part of the agricultural system. Of the 800 acres left, 400 of it is rough grazing, and the rest is under the arable rotation. We run a herd of suckler cows and breeding ewes with 70 cows and 400 breeding ewes. We breed all our own replacements, and we sell everything that is surplus to our requirements in a finished state direct to the abattoirs. The property has been managed since 2006 as an organic unit. We came here in the late 80s and took over the farm from my wife's father and mother, and her grandfather in fact bought the place back in 1923. I come from New Zealand originally. I came to Britain in 1981, and I worked as an agricultural economist in Aberdeen for a few years. Then Beth and I got married in 85 and we went farming on a tenanted property near Huntly, and in the late 80s we got the opportunity to take over this property. Time is moving on, and we're getting to the point where we have to think about what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. So my youngest daughter Nikki and her partner here Tom taking a bigger interest in the property, and we'll take over the management of the place in due course.
Originally from South Lincolnshire, a little town called Stamford, surrounded by quite a different mixed agricultural community, predominantly towards vegetables but also arable as well. I originally started in the packaging of produce, fresh produce actually, later led to seed sales in vegetables, and then through meeting Nikki started to come up here and decided to move about 3 years ago.
We farmed conventionally when we first came here, carrying on much the system of Beth's father before us. Place was well farmed by him and his father. Circumstances in the early 2000s, I suppose, were starting to change in terms of agricultural support and what have you. We had become quite heavily involved in conservation in farming, and I guess what today you would call regenerative farming, and the incentives, I guess, to convert to organic made us look seriously at this option. And I would have no hesitation in saying it was the incentives that really made us take the jump. But having done it, we are delighted with the way the farm operates. It put a whole new challenge back into farming for us. Every day is a challenge today. The solutions have to be more deeply thought through than they are in the conventional situation.
My sort of role at the moment is I have a full-time job with Baird's Malt, which is great to give me an in-depth look into, as I say, moving up here 3 years ago, gives me a great exposure to agriculture in Aberdeenshire, which is vastly different to Lincolnshire, as you can imagine. And also it allows me to support Roger in some of the commercial elements of the farm, but also getting a good benchmarking over other farming practices and looking at, as Roger said, in comparison to conventional farming, like Roger alluded to, the solutions have to be more thought out over a longer period of time. Issues such as soil fertility, pests, weeds being a particular one. So how do we challenge those, or how do we tackle those? I think it very much comes from looking at the wider community as well, sharing solutions or taking solutions from other people, but also trying to get to the bottom of the problem and looking at potential controversial, some would say, methods to tackle these problems. As I say, without being differently to conventional, there's not a sort of textbook exercise that you can go follow to resolve a problem. The one that springs to mind most recent would be couch grass. It's, in the conventional world, it's a relatively simple solution, but in the organic situation, the nature of the plant is that it's very vigorous and it will grow from multiple points in the field. So sort of mechanical cultivation doesn't do the trick. In fact, it could potentially make it worse. We looked at a number of studies with the involvement of buckwheat and growing a crop of buckwheat, which we started about 2 years ago. We mechanically harrowed the couch off and then planted the crop of buckwheat in about May to August, with the thoughts to incorporate, but we later harvested because it was such a good crop. But the idea behind it is to smother out the growth of the couch grass. Now, the results of that, I don't think we can quantify just yet, because it's as I say, it's not a next year solution. But we feel it did make a positive contribution towards maybe not reducing, but definitely sort of halting the progress of couch.
I think it has reduced it, actually. I think it has reduced the couch. Hasn't got rid of it, but it has reduced the problem. And we're looking at it now as a possible solution to stop the ingress of weeds from surrounding the edges of the fields, coming in from the dike sides and things like that. So it was an idea you came up with this year. We have a lot of problems with thistles, creeping thistle in particular, coming in from the side. That just gets worse with each stage of the rotation, doesn't it?
Yeah. And the good thing about buckwheat is it's very frost intolerant. So in terms of getting close to the edge to cut it down or harvest it, well, nature does that for you. The frost will kill it off, and therefore you can just start again. Yep. But if you can get some suppression activity through the growing period, then it's got to be a plus.
Yep. It does have a chemical in its root system which is probably helpful in controlling many weeds, and that looks quite promising. But as a crop itself, we can see potential in it as well. People maybe don't think that it grows in this part of the world, but we've been quite successful in getting crops to harvestable stage with it. Just finding a market's going to be the problem.
I think what a really important point to your question of how do we challenge it is you've got to think outside the box. You've got to be willing to take the step into something new. Buckwheat was a completely new situation with us, anyway. For us. Yeah. Well, I would say in Aberdeenshire. Yeah. And, you know, the results are pending, I suppose, but things are looking promising. The
crux of farming organically, I think, is, as we alluded to earlier, was long-term planning and the concept of rotation, getting back to the basics of good agriculture, the importance of moving the land through various crops, moving it into grass for a stage of reinvigorating the ground, fertility building, and then back into crops, exploiting that fertility again. And over the years we have maintained crop yields on spring barley of generally around about 2 tonne to the acre, 5 tonne to the hectare. And we've been doing it now for nearly 20 years, and those yields have really not fallen over that time. And crop rotation has been probably the most important way of controlling weeds, whether it's in the pasture or or whatever phase it is in the rotation.
Currently, you'd be a 5-year grass pasture, 2 years barley, and then into a peas and barley mix with undersown with grass to go back into grass following.
Well, the same weeds that affect everybody. Thistles, creeping thistle, spear thistle, and dockins are the main one, and couch, of course, is the underlying problem. And really, we're no worse here, I don't think, than many conventional farms. All those weeds respond well to fertility, but they also can be controlled through the methods Tom was mentioning, or through physical cultivation of the land and rotation. And I think we just live with them. Weeds, to some extent, are a state of mind. One man's weed is another man's crop. So your attitude has to change a wee bit in it. But keeping the place looking reasonably tidy is what we aim to do.
When I came to the farm, we're growing about 120 acres of spring barley. for feeding purposes, basically, to get the cattle through the winter. As I said, my day job is with Baird's malt, and there was an opportunity there, just out of curiosity, to see what a separate market towards organic malting was, and whether the barley by some chance would meet that specification. So we got it tested, and absolutely we were bang on the spec for malting. So pushed forward with that to try and look at a bit of a niche market of organic malting, and it made sense at the time, the commerciality of it, to, if you're growing a premium product, to then replace it with feed barley later on, which is a route we've taken for the last couple of years, which has led to some good forward contracting, basically, and security within the farm.
The general rules of organic farming are that the health of the animal takes priority. So all the things that are available to the conventional farmer are also available to the organic farmer. What we try to do is to minimise the use of medicines, things like anthelmintics and what have you. But if they're necessary, then we can use them. If we overuse them, then the animals cease to become saleable as organic stock. We draw up a livestock plan at the start of the year, and this is approved by the, in our case, SOPA, the certifying authority. And it's also drawn up in conjunction with the vets. But again, we go back to the basics, which is stocking rate and rotation. So we can minimise a lot of problems if you reduce your stocking rates, both inside and outside, and rotation of animals around the pasture is the other crucial thing to it. So we operate a clean grazing system for sheep and for cattle, and Tom mentioned that we have the land and grass for 5 years, and that 5 years follows a pretty strict rotation as well. So in year 1 we would graze it with sheep, which is obviously clean of any sheep before. In year 2 we would cut it for silage. In year 3 we would graze it with young cattle. In year 4 we would graze it with older cows or with cows and calves. In year 5 we'd maybe go back to sheep again. So there's at least a 2-year period between livestock species before they go back onto that pasture again. And that seems to minimise the burden of build-up of worms and other parasites. The sheep are strategically, well indeed all the livestock are strategically wormed or treated for liver fluke is the other problem we have. So we would treat the breeding ewes with an anthelmintic about a month before lambing. They also get their normal clostridial vaccination at that point, and that's the only time that the ewes will see an anthelmintic. Most of the lambs will finish off their mothers and certainly off grass, and probably less than half of them will ever receive an anthelmintic before they're slaughtered. Before we give them an anthelmintic, we generally test them. Occasionally we will have to step in and treat if we once had an outbreak of nematodirus, for instance, and we'll go and treat that straight away, simply because it takes over so quickly. But generally for stomach worms and what have you, we would test the animal's dung before we would treat. Same with the cattle. The cows are routinely injected for liver fluke once a year, once they come off the rough grazings at the end of the year, and the young calves are treated once in their lifetime with a general purpose wormer and liver fluke, and that seems to see them through to slaughter. All the animals that are surplus to our requirements are sold in a finished state, direct to the abattoir. We've moved around the abattoirs a wee bit, but for the last few years we have been selling all our cattle directly to ABP in Perth, and we enter a contract with them in the autumn we know the premium that we're going to be getting for the next 6 months, indeed next 12 months, but most of our cattle are sold between now and May. They go away at about half a dozen a month, sorry. And the old cows, if we can sell them organically, we do, but the market for that is a bit fickle, so probably they go into the conventional market. Lambs, we are getting a small premium for them, again direct to one of the abattoirs. We're selling to Scott Beef, and most of those lambs are going to Marks and Spencer's, as I understand it.
So the future of the farm, I suppose at any point is a world of opportunity. I think Roger and Beth have done just a fantastic job of getting the foundations and the fundamentals, along with Beth's father as well. All that effort and time has been put in to get the foundation of the farm to where it is today, with regards to everything we've spoken about with soil fertility and disease and pest pressure. So really, my thought process, and we're still working on it at the moment, but my thought process is to look at a bit more sort of data-driven as results. We have a rough idea of, you know, our yield figures and growth rates with cattle and sheep and everything else. But I'd like to look at that a little bit more in detail to see where we can make some really good changes towards increasing that. And that may be looking into new technology on the farm as well, with the way we plant the crops. We take a very traditional method. We probably haven't looked at the compaction issues maybe, because we're going over it quite a lot of times, or maybe even adding precision agriculture with GPS, just to get a bit more result in what we're doing. So that would be a good opportunity to incorporate some methods that I know a lot of people are using at the moment. Also, I think we mentioned at the beginning, diversity is such a big part of a farm, and here at Knock we've got lots of different avenues made out of our own hobbies as well, with Nikki, my partner, very involved with the horses. So we have a cross-country course that people can use to hire out, but also, as Roger said, with the livery business, we'd like to expand that, see if we can continue that at the very least, and see where that takes us. But then there's a world of different opportunities out there, and I think it would be wrong to just look down the crops and cattle and sheep. I think we have to be looking at anything at the moment, just to see where the future takes us.
The only thing I would say, in addition to what Tom said there, is I think it's exciting times ahead for agriculture. I can see conventional and organic agriculture coming closer together, actually. In time, I think the technological developments in precision farming are moving so fast that I just wish I was 30 years younger, I think. But the place is in good hands, so I'm not too bothered.